Hello and welcome. I'm James Thurlow. I'm a marine scientist and a Humber resident.
And I'm Sarah Beasley. I'm a writer and presenter, and I've lived in the Humber region all my life.
In this series, we'll be looking at some of the many facets of this wonderful estuary and the industries which underpin the economy of the area.
And the rich and varied wildlife of the region, including the biggest population of migratory and wintering birds in the world.
We'll also be meeting some local characters, some of whom may be known to you already, but we also hope to uncover a few new treasures of this often undervalued region.
And I'll be learning a lot more about how inspiring this area is to both artists and visitors alike. I can honestly say there's nowhere quite like it. Welcome to our estuary.
I'm here at Spurn Point, a truly unique place on the north bank at the very mouth of the Humber. A long, narrow, crooked spit of sand stretches out from the Holderness coast right across the entrance of the estuary, with the North Sea on one side and then the beginnings of the mighty Humber on the other. I'm joined by Andy Gibson from the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust. And morning, Andy.
Good morning.
Can you tell us a little bit about what people mean when they say Spurn's changing and it's washing away?
I feel people relate that partly to the built environment, with the loss of the road down Spurn and the removal of the telegraph poles, the change in occupation of the peninsula. But Spurn is a dynamic sandspit, and its whole life is about change and movement. But that's very similar to the East Coast, and we build on these built environments on this changing landscape, and people find that difficult to adapt to.
So these changes are to be welcomed to some extent because they're just part of the dynamic process of the estuary?
They are, if they look at the built environment, welcomed is a really difficult word for people to sort of take on and embrace, but they are vitally needed to maintain the estuary for all its traits, whether it be natural, economic, drainage. It's all about Spurn being part of that macro estuary.
So material is being eroded to the north of Spurn on the North Sea side, and this material is what is continuing to build the spit. That's correct?
Yeah, and that material is boulder clay. It's made up of sands, shingles, gravels, stones, and that washes out the cliffs, the crumbling bits, and then is deposited along the Spurn Peninsula.
And what works are going on at the moment following the tidal surge, since the road's been washed away?
We've had to all adapt. The users of Spurn, there's associated British ports, there's ourselves, there's the RNLI, and we've used new vehicles. We've used 4x4s, we've adapted to what we have to do, we look at the tide, we transport things differently. And the public is still more than welcome on Spurn. It's just about walking. It's about big space, big skies, big opportunities. It's a wonderful place in my book.
Well, thanks very much. And I'm sure you'll agree with me, this is definitely one of the best places to visit on the estuary.
The Humber has a shifting bed, and so the safe channel in which a craft can travel is always changing. A suspension bridge with no support piers midstream would not obstruct the estuary. Secondly, because of the geology and the topography of the area, the cost of constructing a tunnel would have been excessive. Construction took 8 years, and at the peak of activity employed thousands of workers and used thousands of tons of steel. The bridge opened up both socially and economically to previously remote and insular areas of England. The bridge has saved many millions of vehicle miles, not only for locals and commercial vehicles, but also for tourists and visitors to the area who may not have been able to travel around the estuary with such ease. So I'm now on the bridge at the base of the Hessel Tower, just about to go up to the viewing platform, 500 feet above me. Wish me luck! Here goes! So I've made it here to the top of the Hessel Tower on the Humber Bridge. It's amazing, the sight is spectacular. I can just make out the green roof of the Water's Edge, the visitor centre at Barton, and right in the distance is the Immingham Power Station. So it is very windy today, so I'm kind of being blown around, it's very blustery, but I've been told that there are days when it's beautiful and they're in their t-shirts, the maintenance guys working up here, so it's not always cold and windy. I wouldn't want to be up here when it's snowing and a blizzard, but apparently when it's foggy, all they can see when they're up here is the tip of the other tower. Wow, well that was incredible, and what fantastic views. Now I'm going to the anchorage to see where all these cables lead to. So these thousands of cables are spliced together to form one continuous cable, which is then wound around thousands and thousands of times from one anchorage, one side of the river, over to the other anchorage, the other side. And this provides the tension, or should I say suspense, to support this huge structure. Not a lot of people know that. Wow, that was an incredible experience, and one not many people get the privilege of having. I tell you what, next time I drive along this bridge, I'm going to really think about what engineering went into this incredible structure. It's fantastic.
So I'm here with Gordon Kell from the Humber Nature Partnership, and Gordon's going to be talking to us a little bit about the Humber Estuary. So Gordon, given the high level of economic development on the Humber Estuary, how can we guarantee that conservation is treated appropriately and that the wildlife is looked after as it should be?
Well, we've got a long history on the Humber of conservation work, and now we've formed the Humber Nature Partnership, and that's a partnership which includes both the public and the private sector, and working together with them will ensure that we can harmonise both looking after the natural aspects of the estuary and making sure that economic development, which is significant on the Humber of course, with offshore wind, etc., we can work together to ensure that that will happen. Okay, and what's particularly special about the wildlife on the Humber? Yeah, the wildlife on the Humber is significant, as you probably know. We have such a variety. I mean, the estuary itself is highly designated as a special area of protection area and a special area of conservation. And we have stretching from Donanook, we have the grey seals of course, we have significant important species of birds like the bittern and the marsh harrier and the avocet, and we have this extraordinary fish called the lamprey which travels through the estuary up into the Ouse and to the Trent. And so it's a very special area, and in many ways one of our jobs is communicating that to people, because people don't realise how special the estuary is. They see it as a brown river, and so there's significant natural habitat here as well for birds and for butterflies and for insects and a whole host of things which are so important to the quality of life and for people to understand and to enjoy. And it's our role to see that that is conserved and enhanced, improved, and to do that in partnership, as I say, with the significant industrial development that goes on the river as well.
Going forward, we can actually deliver these conservation objectives with all the economic development as well?
Yeah, I'm particularly optimistic because we do have a very good history of partnership on the estuary. So we're not starting from scratch, we're not starting from day one. So and that goes from both the north and the south bank with multinational companies and companies involved in the ports and logistics. And now we've formed this new partnership. What has impressed me is the way in which the board's working together to ensure that this happens. And what we are seeing is an increasing understanding by the private sector of the importance of conservation and how they can contribute to that. So we already have a very powerful background in doing ecological work with existing companies. And I think building upon that and getting this greater awareness of the estuary and the wider population, I'm very optimistic that we're going to do things which are not going to only benefit our present generation but subsequent generations as well.
Well, that's very encouraging.
Thanks, James. Good to be with you.
A pleasure. After the break, I'll be off to the National Nature Reserve at Farings to see another example of how abandoned industry can create valuable habitat. Please join us.
A perfect example of how the Humber Management Scheme is working to preserve natural environments can be found a short walk away on the Barton foreshore at the Water's Edge Visitor Centre. Water's Edge was completed in 2006 and can be seen clearly from the Humber Bridge. It's part of the UK's Earth Centre network, which means it was built with sustainability in mind. It has solar voltaics to generate electricity, a water recycling system which includes rainwater capture and grey water recycling using the reed beds. You'll also notice a lot of recycled materials in the fabric of the building too. There's a number of walks you can follow here, suitable for both families with toddlers and the more serious walker amongst you. The River Humber starts where the River Ouse and Trent meet in the west and runs east nearly 40 miles before coming to the North Sea. From the North Sea back to the estuary, I'm paying a visit to an exciting project which has not only prevented thousands of homes from flooding, but also created a natural habitat for the estuary's wildlife. I've come to a spot called Julian's Bower. This is an amazing turf maze that was cut out in the 12th century by monks. There's absolutely stunning views which clearly show where the Ouse and the Trent meet the Humber. In 2006, 450 hectares of farmland became a realignment site. I'm here with Tom James, ABP's Environmental Manager, who's here to tell us a bit more.
We do own various sort of patches of land throughout the Humber that you wouldn't perhaps immediately associate with our port activities, and it so happens that an area of land here at the Alkborough Flats Managed Realignment Site was just one of those examples. An estuary is an incredibly complex natural environment, and activities on an estuary can affect it in many different ways, in chemical, biological and physical ways that can alter the way the water works, the way the morphology of the bed of the estuary, the riverbed actually works, the way that sediment is distributed throughout the estuary. And it's important for us to take these things into account.
So what is realignment?
Essentially, when you are looking to try and replicate, increase estuarine habitat in the context of an estuary, it entails finding normally a piece of agricultural land that's relatively low-lying, and you essentially build a new flood wall behind the site, a new flood defence behind your sort of denoted managed realignment site, and then you create a breach in the old seawall, and thereby allowing the flood tide to naturally infill the site. It effectively becomes a tidal basin, and exit the site also on the ebb tide. And through a repeated process of flood and ebb tides, transporting sediment into and out of the site, that sediment gradually accretes actually within the managed realignment site, thereby replicating the different types of habitats, the mosaic of habitats that we find within the estuary.
What kind of habitats have been introduced from the realignment?
It can vary from mudflats, just basically something that probably, to the naked eye looks a bit kind of brown and boring really. Mudflat represents a fantastic feeding resource for various insects and benthic invertebrates that actually dwell in that mud itself. And that habitat can also vary depending on how far you go up in the tidal cycle. So there are areas perhaps that aren't inundated on every single tide, only slightly inundated. Those will be areas that we would characterise as salt marsh. But that in itself is a very wide definition and can encompass all sorts of different types of plants. And that in itself also represents a valuable habitat for birds.
So what kind of things can people see here?
So at Alkborough we can see a variety of different habitats that range from mudflats, just plain mudflats, to different types of salt marsh, to intertidal reed beds as well. The inner estuary is often characterised by quite large amounts of reed beds, and each of those habitats has essentially a food chain attached to those and a different sort of characteristics from the point of view of estuarine ecology attached to those sorts of habitats. But Alkborough in particular, it is the largest managed realignment site in Europe. It's a pretty special location.
I'm here at Farings National Nature Reserve near Barton upon Humber. Clay has been dug here since Roman times to make bricks and tiles. So let's go and see how another former industrial site has left an interesting legacy for wildlife. I'm here with Emma Wilmot, Senior Education and Community Officer.
Hello there.
Thanks for coming. And could you just tell us a little bit about the history of the site? I gather it's quite interesting.
Farings is a fascinating place. Really good quality clay was dug out through the autumn and winter time. It was processed, it was shaped, and then it was fired in large kilns on site and made into the bricks and tiles that you can see around this area and beyond today. So if you're around the Humber Estuary area and you see some lovely terracotta colour pan tiles, wavy tiles around this area, they could well have been made at Farings before it became a nature reserve. What happened towards the 20th century and the early 20th century was there are cheaper building materials coming in, sort of slate, that sort of thing, and the industry went into decline. And so in the 1950s, Farings was finally abandoned as a clay works and was left over to nature. And then, about 30 odd years ago, Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust got involved and we started managing the reed beds that you can see here today and the freshwater environment that we have, managing that for nature conservation, in particular some of the rare wildlife that we get here on site.
And your job for the Wildlife Trust is educating people, so could you educate us as to what sort of wildlife we could expect to see here at the moment?
Right now we're just starting with the migration season for birds, so we've got some very exciting visitors will be turning up over the next few weeks, the next month or so. The swallows have gone for the summer, the end of the summer, so we'll be getting some of our wildfowl coming over from Scandinavia. We get a really great looking duck, which is called a shmew, that we quite often get arriving when it starts getting really cold from Siberia, and that's black and white. The male is black and white and really attractive. We also, during the winter period, get a lot of very interesting thrush species. So you may have heard of redwings, you may have heard of fieldfares, and we do get a large number coming here. When it gets too cold over in Eastern Europe, we get big flocks arriving and feasting on all the berries and the rose hips, etc. that we get on site. So it's a really interesting time for all sorts of things arriving.
Occasionally the Humber can give us nasty surprises, as it did on December the 5th last year with the tidal surge. I gather that you were quite badly affected here.
With a lot of places along the Humber bank, the water, the estuary came over the top of the flood defences and it washed through quite a lot of the nature reserve. We had small areas that were untouched, which has actually been a real blessing, but it came over, went through the nature reserve, washed debris from the bank across and actually went into the education and visitor centre that we've got here. So we've kind of been out of commission for 9 or so months, and we reopened on the 16th of August, the weekend of the 16th of August, with a big craft fair, and we're pretty much back to normal, business as usual, with education groups, events, activities, and open to the public with a brand new renovated shop and lots of lovely gifts that you can get and a wonderful place to visit.
Oh, great. Well, I'm glad you're back up and running.
Thank you.
And thanks for talking to us.
Artists often find inspiration in many natural environments. To some, the Humber Estuary may seem bleak and forbidding, but to others, it's proven a rich canvas for their creativity. Come on then. I'm here with Annabelle McCourt, local artist and filmmaker. So Annabelle, tell me what inspires you about this area personally.
I think everything inspires me about this area, really. You can't go wrong. I think what I really enjoy is seeing that through other artists' eyes. So people will travel literally from all over the world and come here and say, you know, wow, this is incredible. And as a child growing up in the area, you know what it's like coming from Grimsby. I was thinking of every way possible to escape. You know, how can I get away, work all over the world? And it's odd, you find yourself coming back here and being hugely inspired by the massive vistas, the attitude. I suppose Humberston Fitters itself is kind of like the ultimate work of folk art.
Yeah.
And I think it's just, how can you not be inspired by such an incredible place?
Absolutely. I understand you've made a fictional film in this area called Delphine, is that right?
So yeah, again, very much inspired by the area. I'm used to normally making documentaries, kind of social, gritty, realistic documentaries there, and I wanted to actually make a drama. And my dramas, I always try and come from an arty angle with that. And the idea was, the premise essentially, was that the sea falls in love with an eccentric marine biologist and tries to sweep her away. So the actual only character as such in the film is mostly from the perspective of the sea.
Would you say that the Humber Estuary as an area is sort of undervalued when it comes down to sort of the arts and creativity?
I think in the outside world, I mean, maybe that is the perception, but people are very switched on here and they know what an incredible resource they have in the area, and they genuinely enjoy welcoming people to this, you know, to enjoy it. And working with artists myself, you show them this place. I think there's nothing ugly about the area, there's nothing depressing about the area, and that's the way it can be perceived in the media. But for me, I just think that's a matter of a lack of imagination and how people work with a space. But any time you bring an outside artist to this area, they are absolutely blown away by it. If it's in Barton upon Humber, the clay pits, people making tiles, to interpreting the space, to working with the Humber, it's that incredible landscape when you come from somewhere quite hilly, just these huge, huge skies, these incredible vistas. And I think there's nothing that people want more, and nothing I want more, is probably to have a Humberston fitty to stay here and work with this landscape for the rest of my life.
Totally, yeah, I agree. It's been a pleasure, Annabelle.
Thank you very much for your time, I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
If you'd like to find out more about any of the items on today's show, please go to www.estuary.tv/Our Estuary.